ready and loaded and ready to get started here. I see our guests of the day have joined us on stage. Thank you, everybody, for joining who's in the audience and who's listening on record. We have a great session ahead. I'd like to welcome you all to the second episode of Beyond the Chain featuring Nibiru Chain. Beyond the Chain is an explorative series where we welcome innovative up-and-coming Layer 1 and Layer 2 blockchain foundations to share with us information about their chain, their vision, and how they're navigating to distinguish themselves in the current blockchain environment. We see across the blockchain and cryptocurrency landscape a multitude of L1 and L2 chains launching. And at DIA, as a cross-chain Oracle provider, it is of vital importance to be up to speed, following industry trends, and of course, familiar with as many of these promising chains as possible. So we also intend for this series to be educational, interesting, and engaging for all of the extended DIA community and beyond. So with that said, sit tight and get comfortable as we dive into the second episode of Beyond the Chain and welcome on a new Layer 1 that is building with the goal of ushering in the next era of money, Nibiru Chain. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Unique, who's the co-founder and a lead developer at Nibiru, and Eric Pinos, who is the ecosystem growth lead at Nibiru. Eric and Unique, can you guys hear me well? And how are you guys doing today?
Hi, doing pretty well.
Nice. Eric, are you there? Can you hear us?
I'm here. Yep, all good.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, at that, we always like to get started by getting to know our speakers a bit and getting everybody in the audience the opportunity to know about your origin story of getting into crypto and kind of just a little bit of background on who we're chatting with today. So before we dive into Nibiru, maybe could you guys give us some insights where it all started for you guys and maybe what was your introduction to this exciting space? Eric, how about we start with you?
Sure. So I'm the ecosystem growth lead at Nibiru. Previously, I was doing ecosystem growth at Ontology Network. I got into this space in 2014. I was part of the MIT Bitcoin Club. And then I've always had a passion for decentralization technologies, whether it's identity or reputation or, DeFi, NFTs, gaming. My background is in virtual reality development. I created games for the Oculus. And then I started working on decentralized identity and reputation, and now taking this forward with Nibiru, working on creating a seamless integrated DeFi hub.
Eric definitely has a really compelling and interesting background. I've actually known Eric for some time now. We've actually met in person a bunch of times in the past. So really glad to have Eric on stage today and really interested to hear more about sort of the project that he's now supporting and working to build out. So thanks for that, Eric. And Unique, over to you. What was your introduction and maybe some background on Unique and how you got into the space?
Yeah, so mine was in around like summer toward or more into like the late portion of 2021. And basically, prior to Web3, I was working as an AI engineer. So I was in industry doing machine learning stuff for several years. And then basically, like a lot of my network and close friends were involved in that as well. And it was, a buddy of mine named Anush just recommended me to work on this project called Sommelier. So he was doing like ML and data science work for them to develop on-chain strategies. So they were asking like, do you know other people, similar to yourself? He recommended me. And yeah, this was Som is another Cosmos DApp. I mean, it does a lot of stuff on the Ethereum side that essentially creates infra and a platform for like executing and investing in automated trading strategies on chain. So that was my foray into crypto. So I was doing um, data science work there, a little bit of like protocol development stuff, and then that gave me a really solid grasp of like Cosmos, IBC, Ethereum, and was like under the mentorship of like the founding team and members there. So it was like Zaki and Jack Zamplin and Tariq Lewis on that works on Paloma, and yeah, so that's also where we got into like Nibiru was kind of born out of the 2021 Cosmoverse because that's where I met a lot of the other uh, team in like Portugal around the time of ETH Lisbon, and so yeah, I guess it's all history from there.
Nice. Well, thanks for that background, and maybe we can use that as the perfect segue or transition into a background on Nibiru Chain. So, Unique, as the co-founder here, can you give us a little background on how the idea for Nibiru came to life? And would love to know a little bit of, how the name came to life as well. Why is it called Nibiru?
Sure. So originally, the core idea kind of centered around maybe two or three things. So one was like bringing ways for the rest of the Cosmos ecosystem to speculate and hedge exposure on assets that were anywhere, not just in the IBC landscape. So in particular, you'd want that to be like um, getting exposure on BTC and ETH, but can also be for Sol or whatever other, if another L1 becomes like really mainstream. That was one of the like core objectives. And then another was build any necessary infra to bring real world assets on chain through NUSD, um, and kind of have it act as an interchain stablecoin and help solve like liquidity fragmentation and more so just like the wrapped asset problem on IBC, so that there's kind of just like an interchain dollar. So that was like we weren't necessarily as tied to the solution on how to do this, but more those are kind of the what we that was what we were aiming for, right? So naturally, this concretized into more specific dApps as we iterated on the initial framing. So when we first started building it, we were actually most like focusing on something that involved like CDPs and UST was still a thing. So it's definitely the idea has definitely evolved substantially since we first started. But yeah, as for the second part of your question, the name. So the basically we came across the name Nibiru from Babylonian astronomy. So similar to like how you have like Babylon is one of the other Cosmos chains. So we Nibiru is from that similar like naming convention. So Nibiru translates to like crossing or a point of transition. So um, we liked in certain scholarly interpretations, it's a cosmic axis or pivot around the heavens or earth, around which the heavens and earth revolved. And then in others, it's thought of as like a portal between the visible and invisible realm of the gods. So these seemed like an awesome tie-in to the cosmos ecosystem, where a lot of the branding, themes center around space and astronomy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting background on the name. It's funny that within the crypto space, there's so many unique names, and definitely interesting to always learn how they originated and where they come from. But within your explanation there, I found it really interesting how you were sort of positioning NUSD to be this on ramp or this way of gaining exposure, bringing real world assets on chain. So I'm looking forward to diving more into the utility of NUSD and sort of the architecture of that stablecoin. But nonetheless, maybe we can dive a little bit deeper into Nibiru. I'm going to try to say it as you did, Nibiru, and understand a little more about why you chose Cosmos for sort of the architecture and the ecosystem in which Nibiru is present. So, in today's multi-chain world, really, arguably one of the most significant aspects that can affect the liquidity and the community that a chain captures and is exposed to is the ecosystem which with its associated. So, we know that you decided to build Nibiru using Cosmos SDK and Tendermint Core. And can you take us through this process from the early stages of how you navigated which ecosystem and architecture to utilize and associate Nibiru with?
Yeah. So for one aspect of it is the some of the innovations we wanted to do required pretty low level changes that we weren't going to get out of the let's say the EVM, because that seemed like a natural thing to do would maybe just be to build dApps on layer two and then try to unify them in the front end, right? Um, so one aspect is like let's say let's say a feature on Nibi perps we want to do is to have liquidations built in to be automated, an automatic piece of the chain. Um, so that kind of required having, you know, hook logic to execute things outside of a normal body of transactions, like that just occur in the block. And so the Cosmos stack tended really well to be like changes like that, where we needed a lot of low level flexibility at the, like at the chain itself. And same thing goes for like making the native oracle and things like that. But the other side of it, which I guess is a big part, is also just the combination of some of the team. I mean, it's not written anywhere on the site, but one of the other founders is like was the engineering director of Tendermint for the past few years, and then we also have huge pretty heavy contributor is like Freudy, who works on like Archway and the Cosmos SDK. And so a lot of our engineering team is like really strong Cosmos devs specifically. So it kind of was just natural there. So we're like familiar with the SDK and WASM and everything. But yeah.
Awesome. Also, a perfect segue here into sort of understanding why you decided, or maybe some of the benefits and caveats of using COSM WASM. But nonetheless, to reflect on what you just said, I think it's sort of interesting how some of the features which you're seeking to build out and provide are those which are requiring this sort of more app chain architecture, right, as you mentioned. And also the background of the team just kind of made sense. So that's how it came to life in terms of the Cosmos and Cosmos SDK and Tendermint core utilization. So let's dive into smart contracts on Nibiru and how they're written in Rust Cosm WASM, which runs on WebAssembly, otherwise known as WASM runtime. Can you give us, our audience, maybe those who are a little less technical, perhaps, insights on even what this means at a high level? And then maybe can you give us some of the added benefits and caveats of uh, smart contracts that are written in Rust Cosm WASM as opposed to any other, perhaps, let's say Solidity or another programming language, so to speak?
Got it. So yeah, so WebAssembly, or I'll start with that. So WebAssembly, or I'll just say WASM from here on, is generic. So it's your VM. So basically, in the EVM has methods that basically require uh, a blockchain, meaning it's like specifically catered to that, whereas WebAssembly is generic. Um, so what I mean by that is your we say that EVM is just a VM, but it's actually not. It's kind of like it's not just the machine; it's also the runtime. So it makes it a lot like the Java Virtual Machine or JVM in that it's specifically tailored to its use case for Ethereum. So one benefit of having WASM be different, and it's like that it's a general purpose VM, is a lot of different languages started targeting it and supporting WASM specific tooling. So one major perk of using WASM for smart contracting is that it doesn't require creating a new programming language. And so basically you can compose the tooling that's already there for high level languages, in this case like Rust, with WASM binaries just by modifying, its public entry points. So what does that mean, right? That means the tons of super proficient developers from Web2 that already work on low level compilers and interpreters already actively improve WASM and continue to do so and build tooling around it. So the Web3 community doesn't have to develop that infrastructure from scratch on its own, which allows you to kind of like just benefit from top of the line software engineering. Yeah, so without having to build that up. So you basically benefiting from a huge ecosystem of companies that already work on it. So like I think like Figma and AutoCAD and Google Earth use WASM, for example, because it's a pretty small and fast binary form. Yeah, so you may say like, why didn't they just use WASM for like the EVM? Like, why didn't they just use WASM for EVM in the first place? Is more just because of timing. It's a relatively new thing, so you could probably make a compelling case that the EVM might have just been WASM VM instead if it existed at the time, because WebAssembly came around in like early 2017, I think, and Ethereum was, if you're counting Frontier as the initial release, then that's like July 2015. So it just didn't exist at the time. So yeah, but that's on like WASM in particular. But your question was also on like Cosm WASM. So I guess there's a couple things to address there. So one is like you could say like why use WASM in general? Well, so for us is like building on like a Cosmos stack. Of course, you can just build through modules. So sometimes you do want to use a native module, and sometimes you want to contract. Native modules, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, are really good for like granular low level control when you want to touch things like staking or the actual consensus layer, things like that. But if you're trying to like adapt quickly or rapidly iterate on business logic, you get a lot more out of like Cosmos smart contracts because essentially it's a lot easier to do, upgrades and migrations. Like when you're doing a let's say upgrade of like an SDK module, A downside is you have to do what kind of feels like hard forks. Like you have to deploy the new module, have everyone upgrade to the software, and certain times you have to basically you'd have to get the entire chain to switch out the binaries and do a dump state, like dump export their state and then restart, which is like a lot of steps and can be very error prone. Like if you remember, um, I think like there was something when you see like long halts with consensus failures, it usually has to do with this process being so like easy to mess up. So that's like one benefit on like as a developer. More on like the user facing side, I think also it's you gain a lot of security benefits, both in terms of like just the fact that you're writing in Rust, and then another one is that the way that the Cosmosm creators architected it with like the actor model basically makes reentrancy like not a thing. So that's one of the you know I don't know the exact statistic, but I think it's like more than 70 or 80% of the like hacks on ETH smart contracts are from that attack vector. So that having it not be something you have to worry about is pretty awesome actually. So yeah.
Thank you, Unique. I think that was really a comprehensive sort of analysis of the difference between WASM and then awesome, and then and then also COSM WASM and some of the added benefits there of sort of like iterating on business logic, upgrading SDK modules and whatnot, and maybe potentially some of the caveats as well, right? What having to do what feels like a hard fork and able to sort of upgrade the entire chain. Maybe Eric, if we have you live, I know that we lost you there for a sec. If you're here with us, can you take us into sort of like what does this look like in terms of building out an ecosystem? As we know within, or maybe this is an argument I'll take, but within the blockchain space, most developers are comfortable, I would say, writing, let's say, smart contracts in Solidity. Would you agree with this or disagree? And then is there sort of like this additional challenge that you guys have as a chain that is, focused on writing contracts or supporting Cosm Wasm in terms of capturing developers for the Nibiru chain?
Sure. So I think first about the ecosystem. So we're coming into the ecosystem. We're hitting the ground running. We have our own primitives that we've built out, our own version of primitives, because you understand that like for any in any ecosystem growing out, you need a certain couple of things for it to work. So, for example, we have a spot dex, we have a perps dex, and we have a stablecoin. So these tools can help developers just kind of come and already have liquidity. We already have liquidity in our perps dex, for example. We already have liquidity in our spot dex. So because those tools are there, it's easier to build out off of them than it is to try to build something on scratch on a chain where there's no liquidity. For example, we just partnered with Warp Protocol, and so Warp Protocol is working with us to bring limit orders onto our perps dex, right? So people like to expand on the functionality that exists. That being said, there's a lot other tools that could also benefit, like a lending platform or vaults for extra strategies or liquid staking derivatives. So we've been talking with potential partners there to onboard those kinds of projects as well. And then I think the interesting thing about Cosmos is that there's a lot of opportunities there with interactions between chains. So, like accessing liquidity between chains or redeploying outposts on different blockchains. So, a lot of that infrastructure and architecture exists through like IBC, which connects the different blockchains together. And that's what I think makes Cosmos particularly interesting in that chains aren't starting from scratch. They're kind of able to leverage the other ones, and then you see a lot of specialized like different app chains. Like there's an app chain that's just about NFTs, it is not like excessive. Like it makes sense why you would want to have, if you buy into the app chain thesis, why you want to have DApps specific to particular chains. With regards to like validators and isolating the economic activity or being able to like specialize and focus on fast transactions or whatever the features are. And then for the contracts themselves, yeah, I think like there are a lot of developers that do Solidity, especially in blockchain. But compared to the number of developers that there are in the world, right, and the amount of developers that know Rust and know JavaScript, is we want to be able to tap into that. And so I think a lot of questions have been around how do we onboard mainstream developers, right? So it's not just people coming in from other blockchain ecosystems that maybe want to try out different layer ones, but also from the mainstream, like Nibiru could be their first chain that they interact with.
I think there were a ton of valuable insights there. When I look at or analyze a chain, and this is only the second episode of Beyond the Chain, but I have a feeling this is going to be a recurring theme. It's sort of like this chicken and egg problem when building out a new chain, right? So it's like you need functionality to have users, and you need users to drive devs onto your chain. And so Eric just gave some really valuable insights there into some of the applications and functionality that they're natively building out, such as perp protocols, such as a DEX, such as a stablecoin and oracles, that will already usher in or drive both devs and users to Nibiru Chain. I think that's a really valuable takeaway there. And thanks, Eric, for giving some background onto sort of the positioning and how you guys are positioning the building out of Nibiru Chain. Um, maybe there's one question I definitely wanted to address, which is the largest lettering on the Nibiru site is a DeFi hub ushering in the next era of money. Can you guys just sort of like, let's bring this back to a high level. Can you tell us what your goal and vision is for Nibiru as it relates to this message? Either Eric or Unique, whoever wants to take this one. What does this mean, ushering in the next era of money, and how are you guys positioning yourselves to uniquely, solve this?
I think one thing is I'll talk about the UI. So from people to interact with these apps and services, right now it's been very much like you're a developer or you already know how to use crypto, you're familiar with it, you're okay with not good UI because you want to access the benefits of whatever the platform is offering. But for the majority of people, if it's too difficult to use or if it's too cumbersome, they're not going to use it. And then if you have all these different fragmented apps that each have their own UIs, then that also makes it very difficult to interact with.
Yeah, I think to continue off that, I also think like Eric's answer to one of the previous questions kind of touched on a lot of the points. So when we say like ushering in the next ceremony, I guess it's one of this. It's kind of a reminder back to just like the regular Web3 ethos. I'm like, we most of the people working in the space expect cryptocurrency and DeFi to become mainstream or a contender alongside Visa and everything. And so, kind of to get to that point, I guess really one of the things we're mostly centered on, if you wanted to like really simplify it, is just like making the UX as smooth and seamless as possible. Whether that's centralized exchange onboarding into crypto, or you're a newcomer, or even if you're familiar with all these sorts of dApps, but you want to kind of plug into them and have a sort of like dApp store feel where there's like a directory of the different Legos. Um, Starting at the chain to build dApps alongside it was mostly so that instead of us just making like a blank slate and then have it be purely focused around attracting developers, I think one, one way to solve that chicken and egg problem is to kind of build out tools and utilities that people want to use, make them super easy and have liquidity, and then the developers will come if there's apps and users. It's kind of the thesis we're taking. So yeah.
Yeah, so in practice, we're also like integrating any partners that we have. We're trying to integrate them into our front end as well. So like if we, partner with a project and they offer some kind of functionality, they could have their own dApp and their own front end, but we like integrating into ours, especially if it's related to like the perp stacks. And we've been told we have a very nice like perps UI. It makes it very simple for people to interact with. But yeah, building on this concept of like the super app, right, where you can go to one place, one front end, and access all these different applications. Like people need that. People don't want to go to like 7 different dApps to do each of their interactions.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you guys are drawing a nice image here as to sort of the UX that you're discussing, right? Where it's basically, as Unique said, it's like going to an app store, but it's a dApp store. There's one front end through which you can access all of the different apps on the Nibiru chain. Definitely sounds like definitely a good way to usher in the next era of users. And I get it. I see what you guys are getting at in terms of making this as seamless almost as a Web 2 experience, in that us who are crypto native expect crypto to become mainstream, and in order to achieve that you need to sort of make this UX seamless, accessible, and easy to navigate. So that definitely answers that quite well. Can we dive in a little bit into these dApps that we're discussing? Right, we already mentioned, we went over the four which are currently natively being built out. If I'm missing any, definitely let me know. The four are the perp protocol, an AMM DEX, the NUSD stablecoin and Nibiru oracles, which are, of course, interesting for us at DIA to dive into. I want to dive particularly into two of these. The first is the NUSD stablecoin. Reading off your site here, it says Nibiru powers a two-token economic model where NIBI is the staking and utility token for the blockchain, and NUSD serves as a fully collateralized stablecoin interface for bridging or ramping fiat to and from the chain. So maybe we see once again like a multitude of stablecoins launching across different ecosystems and throughout this industry. What led you guys to decide to build out your own native stablecoin? I'm assuming it sort of aligns well with the narrative we're already discussing of making Nibiru this home base for users and dApps. But can you give us some insights into the decision process for creating a stablecoin? What are your goals here? Do you see it powering obviously the Nibiru chain, but even going beyond that, do you see it becoming a prominent stablecoin in the Cosmos ecosystem and even beyond Cosmos?
Potentially. So I think that the easiest way to understand this is to almost look at the just like zoom in on the problem it's meant to address. So in one, let's take the case of right now you have native USDC coming to is through Noble USD on Cosmos, right? You have Gravity Bridge, so Grav USDC. You've got Axelar. Now Wormhole started theirs, and then there are other kind of those are in terms of centralized backing, right? Stable coins that get into Cosmos. There's already like a couple different versions, and then it switches depending. And then I think also the Seller Bridge has one, right? So if you want to plug in from Arbitrum, Polygon, these different places, you already have a couple different assets there just through USDC. And this is I'm talking about Cosmos, but this is the case on other sort of L1 ecosystems too, right? Then now there's this thing of when you move assets via IBC, they're depending on where they started from, it's actually a different asset. So meaning if I move Axelar USDC to Osmosis versus if I went to the Cosmos hub and then straight to Osmosis, they're actually two different tokens. So the one thing there is like if you now I'm only talking about Circle. If I throw in Tether, like the DAI, other things like that, it starts to be Frax. It becomes really complex with like a lot of tokens flying around. So I guess to kind of simplify that across like IBC is you can start with just like in a simple way, almost look at like how Frax went to fully collateralize with USDC. So NUSD would just be kind of a wrapper around these like let's say USDC and Tether from other places. And so instead of us having to have like an ETH paired against DAI, an ETH paired against USDT, and ETH paired against Circle, you kind of just think of it as like this is USD in Nibiru or USD in the Cosmos ecosystem, and then you use those other like probably the fiat backed stables as the collateral, and then eventually one day it'd be nice to plug it into RWAs or like T bills or something, so that it has like becomes yield bearing on its own. But at first, it's basically meant to when we say like stablecoin interface for bridging, you could see why it's meant to be. Kind of a representation of that you don't have to think about which bridge you came in from for the other ecosystem. And then also that you can kind of price them against each other so that if, let's say one, like people want to use the Axelar one a lot or the Noble one a lot more relative to others, that should kind of be reflected in the conversion rate. So yeah, so it's basically meant to, so that you don't have to think so much when you're using the chain. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great answer because I was kind of getting at that in my question. I was suggesting that there's already a ton of stables everywhere. There's already fragmentation. So are you guys adding to the fragmentation or reducing this complexity? And you just got at that very clearly in that, NUSD is sort of this like, it's backed by these stables. These stables are the ones which are collateralizing it to make the user experience once again more seamless and being able to use one standard stablecoin within the Nibiru chain while still having kind of exposure to all of the stables in a sense. So again, I appreciate the positioning there towards reducing the fragmentation and confusion of stables and as they're being bridged from different protocols and whatnot. Cool. So that answers that question. And then the last question, in terms of sort of still on the tech side and what you guys are building out, is the Oracle component. Can either of you guys give us some insights into what led your decision making process to build out native oracles as well, and maybe can you give us some background on what will be the architecture of these oracles, and what types of oracle use cases will they support? So we see that oracles can be delivering price feeds on chain. You can have verifiable randomness. You can have let's say like NFT for price feeds. What are the different types of use cases that you'll target with the Nibiru oracles?
Yeah, so initially one thing was kind of a really common thing that people need is like price data. So um, having a decentralized Oracle solution, like in the same way that I've heard you guys talk about in other cases, like where it's very transparent where you're getting the data from, um, and also available on a more high frequency for applications, you know, like perps and other utilities. That was like one thing to address there. So the Oracle module um, is basically like an iteration on the initial sort of proof of stake one from Terra that they used to uh, you know price Luna, which actually like worked pretty well. Probably worked too well, thinking back. But yeah, so it's essentially our Oracle is generalizable to not just one asset. Like it's not just for Nevi, it's for arbitrary ones through the price feeder. So the validators basically vote, and their risk, essentially like how you kind of keep them as acting honest, is if they are outside the band of consensus for the price or like trying to manipulate it, then they can be jailed and slashed just like in the normal proof of stake. So they have basically it's incentive alignment to participate as like an honest actor. Also, validators already run infrastructure and know how to keep things going, so they make a lot of sense to run oracles too. And the flip side of that is some of the core dApps, and then maybe even external ones too. If we can get people to buy into this idea, could also, if they rely, like in the perps case, it relies heavily on the oracle. So a small percentage of some of the fee revenue that would have been not to like LPs, but toward the protocol is actually added to that proof of stake like rewards pile for the validator because they're participating as an oracle. So the nice thing there is that means like if our sort of if hero dApps kind of excel and get a ton of volume, that also means stakers are getting like a stablecoin piece on top of the normal just needy inflation from proof of stake, right? Because they're staked to the validator staking rewards accrues some stable, and so it's kind of a nice way to kind of tie value accrual back into the token and to the validator set. You asked about, yeah, was that enough detail on like you asked a little bit about how it's designed? I didn't say much about that, but I could. Yeah.
Yeah, would value any insights or anything you want to share on that as well.
Sure. So, um, yeah, basically you have voting rounds, and you can, if you accrue too many misses, then it means that that's counted as like, being a bad actor. So I think we have the vote window. I can't remember what we set the exact parameters to, but the update time is essentially every few blocks. So there should never be more than like a minute passing between when there's like a fresh price for ETH or a fresh price for BTC, or things like that. Then the other thing here, I think, it would also be good to plug into the existing providers, like like your protocol or like Pith and other things for some of those feeds that are harder to address. But the key thing there is our native module is like pretty flexible. So what I imagine happening is that people will, through governance, kind of select or put signaling proposals to say, hey, let's build out feeds for these few things because it'll support other dApps or what have you, and then we can kind of just add that in that they're like always available. Yeah, but then also having kind of as like a fallback to other providers could be good because it basically will just mean that any dApps built on the chain have like you know it'll be, yeah, just like you described. If they can plug into random numbers, if they can use odds, then you can have like betting applications, right, for like sports and other things. Price data is like a huge one for a lot of DeFi protocols. But yeah, that's basically the Oracle module.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. And I often get the question as to like how I consider or look at competition. And I don't really feel like the Oracle landscape should necessarily be like mutually exclusive in terms of competition. I think that having multiple sources of truth, multiple sources of price is always more resilient than one single source. So I value once again how you guys are building this out natively because again, it addresses this chicken and egg problem, right? With DIA, we like to partner and deploy on chains very early stage, and we find that this is such an essential infrastructure component to driving DApp use cases and innovation on the chain. So I understand how you guys are building this out initially natively to create that environment where you drive users and developers to build, and then also looking for external providers for adding resilience to the architecture, adding resilience and options for dApps to build out different types of use cases that might expand beyond those which your Oracle is providing. So definitely really interesting to hear background on that. And once again, also interesting on how you're doing more like time-based updates, right? Every few blocks with, as you mentioned, never more than a minute passing when there's a fresh price delivered. I mean, that's even another instance in which oracles are different in terms of price, time-based updates versus perhaps deviation-based updates versus pull-based oracles. So again, it's interesting to analyze how different oracles are optimized for different use cases. And sorry for going on long about this one, but as you can see, this one definitely sparks my interest a lot as well. So thanks for the insights there, Unique. That was great to hear. And then just sort of like transitioning into the end here and wrapping up, maybe can you give our audience, Eric, this might be more of a question in your domain. Can you give our audience background on what stage of development is Nibiru overall? And are there any exciting milestones ahead on the roadmap for us to look forward to?
Yeah, so our mainnet goes live next month, or actually, rather, it goes live quarter 4. We're figuring out the exact timing around it, and we are in phase 4 of our incentivized testnet. So we've done a lot of things in the past, like trading competitions or hackathons. Actually, we just wrapped up the Cosmoverse Hackmos hackathon just a few days ago, and we're seeing projects come out of that. So lots of exciting stuff. My interests are around expanding like the what people can do with DeFi and what people can do with NFTs. So we have some partners like Coded Estates, which is doing tokenized real world assets, specifically real estate. We're also looking at more ways to utilize like liquid staking derivatives and building these applications on top of each other so they can really be like money Legos. And it's both from existing projects that we've partnered with, but also incubating new projects from scratch. So like I mentioned, like these hackathons, we also have bounties, we have RFPs published online that people can tackle, and they'll get all the resources to help like build out those projects in various different sectors. So definitely an exciting time to be a developer just anywhere in like crypto. And we're excited to like be at the forefront of pushing forward like these new use cases.
Yeah, excellent. Really interesting. I agree. I think it's a great time to be sort of like learning more about Nibiru and getting involved. Now seems like the optimal time. And again, we didn't really have time or address much about liquid staking today on the call, but as that is the most significant sort of DeFi category by TVL, it's great to hear you guys are positioning yourselves and focused on supporting those types of use cases as well. At this time, I'd like to ask you guys, Unique and Eric, is there any other technical or end user differentiations between Nibiru and other chains that we did not discuss that you'd like to highlight? Anything I missed that you want to bring up before we transition into wrapping this up?
Um, Not much to go, not something to go in too much depth. I guess it's just also that we're kind of making first class support that you can plug into the dApps built by, the founding, like the foundation, so that it's easy to kind of have them interoperate with contracts deployed on the chain. But then the next step kind of to go from there is also to make kind of an entry point that you can do them from other chains, right? So it should be kind of like it should be eventually it should be like there's a representative contract that you can kind of like trade the perps on Nibiru from outside Cosmos. So at first it's to have like first cause support on Cosmos with Wasm. Then it will also be like IBC through other chains, so that if you're on Archway, you can use it. If you're on Neutron, you can use it. Things like that. And then the final stage would be like that. It's not obvious you're even using an external chain when you use Nibiru. So yeah, that's just one thing to add, I guess.
Awesome. No, I value that. I appreciate that. That's definitely important. Thought I thought Eric tried to hop in there for a sec, so I gave it a delay. But maybe can you guys, as the last question here, what's the best way to stay up to date and in touch with Nibiru? Let's say both for somebody who wants to give it try it out as a user, and let's say I'm a developer. What are the resources that we should know?
Got it. So yeah, on the user side, just naturally Twitter, following the Nibiru Chain account or joining our Discord has some more frequent updates. And then as a developer, I would say probably Discord's the best chat. There's the Telegram we used for the hackathon. Also, we'll kind of answer technical questions anywhere. And then resources, there are tutorials for like Cosmosm on like the doc site, and then also it's called the CW Nibiru repo. Has like a really good example of how to build like a mono repo structure if you have like both contracts and and external packages at the same time. So we'll probably look to eventually make it where there's like a developer environment that just makes it super easy to deploy. But yeah, that repo is a good like template on how to get started making a new smart contract protocol.
Excellent. Yeah, so definitely encourage everybody in the audience who found interest in this and wants to explore and learn further to go check out those resources. At this time, I'd like to say Unique and Eric and the entire Nibiru chain, thank you so much for joining us on Beyond the Chain episode 2. I felt that this was a very comprehensive episode, both within understanding and learning about what you're building at Nibiru, but also some of the larger sort of themes and differentiations about building within the Cosmos ecosystem, and how you guys navigated that decision making process to build out both your positioning in your architecture, and also the dApps which you're natively building out and covering the chicken and egg problem. I thought this was all around a really great episode, so I can't thank you guys enough for hopping on. Thank you everybody in the audience who joined us today, and everybody who's listening on record. Unique, Eric, any last thoughts before we close out?
Yeah, just thank you for having us.
Awesome. Eric, are you there? I know, by the way, Eric is actually traveling right now, so I also want to thank him for taking time out of his time at at a conference to attend this call and be present with us. Eric, are you still there?
Yep, I'm still here. Feel free to follow me or Unique or Nibiru Chain on Twitter. Feel free to DM us, join our Discord. You can find all the links from the Nibiru Chain Twitter account.
Awesome. You heard it here. And at that, I'd like to once again thank you, everybody. Thanks, Nibiru Chain. Thank you to the audience. And wherever you are, have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you on the next episode of Beyond the Chain. Bye-bye, everybody, and take care. Thanks again, guys.